Tired of outdated marketing advice aimed at the industrial and manufacturing space? My name is Selim Malouf. Join me and my co-host Chris Carolyn as we deliver candid insights from growth-minded leaders, helping you drive results and tackle modern challenges. Cut through the noise to get no-nonsense expertise. Welcome to the Manufacturing Marketing Show. Creating technical content has been somewhat of a challenge for industrial and manufacturing companies. The conversation around it has been heating up in the industrial marketing circles, so we're happy to be joined by our guest today. Adam Kimmel has spent over 20 years as a practicing engineer, R&D leader, and product marketing consultant. He has degrees in chemical and mechanical engineering and is the principal and founder of ASK Consulting Solutions, a technical content writing and strategy firm. He helps engineering, industrial, and technology companies as a fractional content strategist and writer, explaining how their product solutions solve their customers' biggest problems. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Me and Chris, we're very excited when you reached out, joined the podcast. You were one of the first, and kind of made us feel like we're doing something right here with this podcast. So thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of opportunities and stories to tell in this space, so I'm always happy to chat on it.
So both Chris and I have been in-house marketers in the industrial space. Content, like marketing and content, is a concept that is very misunderstood. Whenever marketing content is brought up, it is reduced to making data sheets and the occasional application note. Could you talk to us about the common challenges that you've seen industrial companies face when they're trying to create their own content?
For sure. What I've seen is industrial companies often have a very insulated kind of perspective. So they developed a new product or an approach or a technology that was very difficult, challenging to do, a lot of technical horsepower behind it. And they're excited to kind of rattle off why this was so important and hard to do and kind of what they did. The challenge is they haven't really earned the right with the audience to get to that level yet. They haven't proposed what the problem was that was initially there that they were solving, and why changing the status quo matters. I think given the scale and expense of a lot of the industrial problems and solutions, someone in higher up in the business community or business leadership is going to say, well, why do we need to invest here now versus either nothing or delay that? And so I think when you get focused inward on features, benefits, and how hard it was to develop, I think that's where things kind of diverge a little bit as far as, why did we do it in the first place?
Yeah, I'm glad you put it that way, using the word investing in this, better content, because it's not that they haven't invested in it already.
Right.
It's just about why isn't it working? Because you get some of these places, they have mountains of data sheets and text and specs, speeds and feeds, whatever phrase of the day you want to use. Why isn't that stuff working as well as it used to?
Well, I think those things work for the people actually doing the day-to-day work, the technical specialists that would need to get to that level. The problem is those team members aren't necessarily connected to the problem. They need their work to come to them. They need to be fed that work to do that. They would then need the tech sheet to reference to do their work. Upstream of that, there's nothing to connect why one company's tech sheet would be a better option for them than another company's. There's no delineation of that. And so then the usual, for people that aren't familiar with an industry, the usual criteria are going to be price, are going to be name recognition, referrals, word of mouth. So how would a company either entering a space, expanding into a new offering, what gives them the right to win? They haven't presented the transformation that their solution solves. And if they can't articulate what that transformation looks like, underneath the technical details, they never get there. Even if they're polished and they have a full library, nobody wants to walk in the door of the library, I guess, because they don't understand the transformation that they can expect.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I've been I used to be an engineer doing the design work, and I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of looking at marketing documentation and feeling like, oh, this is fluff. I don't want the fluff. Just give me the data, and I'll compare with you and 10 other suppliers. Put it in your spreadsheet.
Right.
You know, make the numbers work and figure out who I want from that. But uh, the more I've started working in marketing, I understand that I'm, I'm at the end of the journey. Like,
Mhm. Right.
there are other people's that need to be convinced that this is the right solution or right product for me to even get to the point where I'm thinking about who's the best supplier. And a lot of that purely informational content does not work for them. I'll be interested in learning more about what you've seen and the approach of like purely informational content versus some aspirational messaging when it comes to technical content.
Yeah. I think the tendency for technical content is to get into the details, introduce in very brief form what this application is, and then get into it. The why isn't there. So I mean, it, typically what happens is there will be a product launch and then a trade show, and then people will go there and kind of try to talk to as many people as they can. I think the challenge there is, one, are those all qualified warm leads? Don't know that. So then you're just sort of hoping that the 2% of the population ready to buy at the moment you're talking with them are in a position to do that. I don't know how anybody ever buys anything given that ratio, right? So then it's a matter of, if you can go and anticipate, go to those events, but start picking up information, themes, topics that you're hearing from those customers, and say, all right, well, what are they saying? What are they not saying? And how do we develop that into a problem and solution focused content plan? So if you start kind of at the bottom at what is the goal of any of this and work your way back toward the top, that really points the laser beam in the right direction as far as how you should be designing that content. I mean, if you're targeting a problem that no one has, or that maybe you think so based on your experience, but maybe the market's changed in a few year time frame. I mean, how much has the world changed in 5 years, right? So if you're not actively getting those customer insights to feed your content program, it's going to be off base. And if the message is confusing, it all breaks down. So you again can't even get downstream of that. It's got to be focused on what is the audience really concerned about. And if the best companies, what they can do is, if you can anticipate what questions you're likely to get and then answer those proactively in that content, the trust factor goes up exponentially. Then the reader is going to go, oh my goodness, these people know my industry. They understand everything I'm going through. I need help. Let's contact them. And if it isn't that day, then they put you on in their kind of, mental file, so that when they're ready to buy, they reach out. And so there's all these people that may be reading the content then at that point and becoming kind of fans and an audience that know where to find you when the time is right. And then when they reach out, there's a warm lead, then the hit rate goes up and all the numbers look better on conversions anyway at that point.
Adam, I chuckled when you said like solving problems that nobody needs solving, because there's a specific meeting that I remember that I got in trouble for because the engineering team was pitching this new product and asking me on the marketing team to get ready to market it at the trade show. And the first question I asked was, who wants this?
Right. Right.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Adam, like having a goal for the content. And it sounds like we're past the days, which we have been for a while. It's just hard habit to break, is where the goal, what you and Selim both mentioned, is, oh, we're going to the show and we need something.
Right.
Like that's the goal of printing this PDF inside of 3 weeks, right? We've got a new product. We've got to get something out. So yeah, the goal has to happen, well before that. And oftentimes, and love to hear your take, because I feel like all this should be way easier than it is. Mm-hmm. But trying to discover why we can't move past some of these habits. I see just so much content already in play, data sheets, brochure, sometimes like just the most well done, like really great design, but nobody's going to read it. Right.
Mhm.
And unless you get to the engineer spot where they are going to read the whole thing, but how do
Yeah.
we get their attention before that? And what I find is some of the challenges when you try to use that stuff as a base, and when companies do try to do this themselves, knowing that, let's say, okay, we think aspirational messages make sense. Like, let's start talking about the benefits. They try to combine it, you know, and now your data sheet, you're not sure if it's a data sheet or a brochure. It gets super easy for the sales guy because now he just has everything in one thing, but it's like 10 pages and it's just packed with no white space. And so have what's your view on repurposing versus, starting fresh?
Yeah.
Take us through that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is the, combining content forms is a big red flag because it's different audiences. So I've got one piece of collateral. One could go to the technical, person. One should go to the business development person. That should not be the same piece. The other one I would say is kind of there's a decision maker and a decision influencer. So all of those technical pieces of information are going to be kind of filtered by the decision influencer, who's usually technical, to say, oh, this solution actually does help, or this information does help me in a way. It's a way to qualify for the business leaders that the technical solution works. So those are table stakes. But as far as decoupling that, there's got to be that first kind of deeper. I don't know. I like cornerstone content. The idea of one piece that's sort of the manifesto of what it is. What is your point of view on a topic that your customers have? That needs to be articulated in a way that is in the language that the audience uses, in the tone and style and form and distribution channel where they go for information. You could do this great and put it in the wrong place and they won't see it either. So there's a lot of things that have to line up. But if you can walk through the technical rationale for why, then you've earned the right to go deeper. But the first thing is a matter of trying to really get to what is our point of view about this problem. Because if they don't understand that, then it breaks down. So the decision influencer would never be able to convince them because the decision maker has already made up the point of, I don't understand why this matters to me. So then the technical person doesn't even get to see the data sheet. So it's a two-pronged approach of getting that so what understood and really curated first in the right language and in place, and then getting that technical information that they would expect to see, because that's another filter, right? If the data sheet is exactly what the technical influencer would want, then that's another green check that they would go, yeah, this is meeting what we need.
Why is it so hard for industrial companies to have, like you said, a point of view on a problem?
I think this gets down to core marketing fundamentals. So I remember when I was in engineering school, I went to Penn State, and so we would have T-shirts made. If you can't handle chemical engineering, just go to marketing. So there was this whole idea that, oh, I don't. Like Chris, to your point, it's fluffery, or I don't want to be sold to. The miss was that it was how you tie the technology to the audience. That was the critical marketing piece. And so if that's not done right, then the whole thing breaks down. And so I think understanding that why is what enables the technology. I think so many companies were focused inward on what we did and how we did it and how hard it was. We've patented this. We have all these features. It's all insulated. It's not tied to audience and industry and customer feedback. So that's the bridge marketing crosses, and why I think historically, due to that discrepancy between marketing and engineering, that hadn't been done. So the winning companies are waking up to this and seeing, well, we need to tie these audience insights to our product development strategy as closely as we can. The more close that is and the quicker that's done, the quicker you can get to market with a winning solution. So that's where the nexus of kind of marketing and technology comes into play as well.
So is that how, when you're talking about content strategy and having goals, oftentimes marketing is not at the table when it comes to product development, product launches, like let's figure out the messaging after we do everything else, right? And we know how well that goes.
Backward.
So how do you make the case to get in there beforehand? Is it just some strategy conversations with the right people? Because this is where we see there's a wrestle for control, right? Where most times your products, your engineers, your scientists have been in control of all of this for a long period of time. And the closer that you get to adding anything into that, there's less and less control. And it's not about, because I found there's a concern that I'm going to get rid of the specification table. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's still very important. I'm going to add on top of that. We're not here to replace, nor am I the SME that can build the table. That's still like, you guys have we need you guys to control that. So how do you navigate this? And maybe from a perspective of, you said you're, an SME, like were you figuring out this stuff as you were an SME, or was it after the fact?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm a little bit unique in that, being a design engineer and an engineering principal for 2 decades. I mean, I would invent something and I'd be all excited, right? I would take this and, oh, look at what I've done. And I would take it to the manager, and the manager would look at it and go, great, that looks good. What do I do with it? Was really his question, right? And so, I think SMEs love to talk about, as I mentioned, what they did. The way to unlock this is to bring the SME to the table with the marketer in the same room. If it's in series, if the SME is at a different meeting than the marketer, it's going to break down. A marketer being able to talk with the customers directly is the best way to do this. Oftentimes SMEs actually bring that VOC there. So then it's up to the marketer to really craft that. I don't know, you can call it a discovery call. This is the way I work my fractional strategy things, engagements. But if you craft that discovery meeting, the information gathering session, in a way that leads the SME or whoever owns that voice of the customer information through the process, then there's some natural points that they can flow in what they did, how hard it was, the technical details. But because they're guarded, getting them talking initially about, what was the history about this, or why did you develop this? It may not have been rooted in a customer problem, but there is a reason why they did it. Where did the idea come from? So warming them up, getting them talking about that's a great place to start. And it kind of enrolls them and engages them in the process. And, from a genuine, curiosity standpoint of, well, I understand that. I mean, how do you think this helps the market the best and really help with that positioning? I mean, I'm sure, the marketer may have some ideas and thoughts, but so does the SME, and letting them feel like they're a part of the way to frame that messaging has been very helpful. And it's a cheat code because I know what their perspective is, having developed these products. So, it isn't an adversary, it's a team. That tech spec is a tool in the toolbox. But you need to help me let somebody think they need to open the toolbox before we start looking inside of what's there.
Right. And let's dig into that, because it is oftentimes just simple alignment, just getting people in the same room talking to each other. I know there's varying points of view on like the responsibilities of people in the organization to make that happen. Because at the end of the day, this is all new for a lot of organizations. Who are you usually talking to first when you're when somebody reaches out and you're trying to help somebody make this kind of transition?
Yeah. Often at companies that have internal marketing teams, there's one marketer that is completely overwhelmed in an industry that they may or may not have direct expertise. Often they don't. And they've been asked to basically cross this mountain of a hurdle of, all right, we need to get everybody buying our new product yesterday. Let me know how it turns out for you. It's kind of their charter. And so they're just like, I don't even know where to begin. So, I mean, my line that I use is that I speak fluent engineer, which is exactly what that marketer is trying to do. They need to understand how to communicate this highly technical, niche, specialized information to the people that would make the decision on whether or not to pursue it. So an initial call with that marketer, who's usually not the decision maker, if there's alignment on industry, on the need, and on kind of the fit, the fact that, okay, are you comfortable with external people? Are you, there's an internal team, but the external partner is an augmentation to that, not a replacement of that. I think that's there's some maybe putting guard up initially that has to happen there too. But once that's clear, and that, hey, I can bring this engineering expertise to you to help inform your content or to help plan it for you, then it's a matter of getting the decision maker, who's usually the, demand generation leader, a marketing VP, CMO, that level, even a content head, enrolled directly and kind of making the case again, because they're not usually on the initial calls. Typically what happens is that person's going to want to engage their technology team to vet, hey, this all makes sense to me, but I want technology to confirm that I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. So then often that may happen online with me, or it might be offline. And then the process can happen where, all right, well, we're happy to engage. What would your content plan look like? What would it feel like to work together? And how would you design this strategy based on customer insights from the field in a way that positions our product as the solution? And it's positioned not as a sales pitch, more as a technology answer. It's kind of like, well, here's your big problem. We heard these words coming out from you. Here's the way that we've thought to solve it. And then you put on some bottom of the funnel case studies for, here are some peer customers that have used the solution to solve the problem. Here are some ways that they've applied the solution in a way that worked for them. Then the momentum's going in the right direction to let you measure success of that content program.
Yeah. And that sounds all well and good. And it speaks to the challenges I've experienced, where I would love a chance to sit down with the technical team and, not be talked at, have some of these concepts understood. That's kind of where I'm getting at alignment wise. Like the people you just said you're talking to, that works if there's good internal communication, like inside the org. But if they can't get the engineers to the table, we got to get the leadership team involved. And that's where unfortunately you start talking about stuff like culture and why do we need to be doing this? And so it's super interesting because it's different from company to company, right? Like in the last places where I'm coming in and I'm creating teams from scratch, it's like, okay, I can do a bunch of this new stuff that you want me to do. I just can't do it for you guys. Like the SMEs got to be involved because they're the ones with the knowledge. And then when we get in the room, when I do get in the room and we the last homepage we built, we neutered the hell out of it because I couldn't come close to any kind of promise that wasn't like hard data backed. Right. And that's where we just lose all the aspirational. And in the time, and what's missing there is often training and understanding. And, it just becomes this boil the ocean feeling, right, to take these small steps. So have you had any experience kind of helping out with any kind of change management, or maybe talking to leadership or anything like that? Or you usually got marketers that are ready to go?
No, I get marketers. I mentioned the overwhelm factor, especially the more tech, it's almost directly related. The more technical the industry, the more overwhelmed that poor marketer is that reaches out for help. I mean, if they've needed help for, I've had some tell me oh, I didn't sleep well last night. I'm nervous to talk to these SMEs because of this disconnect. And, my value prop is engineers are a different breed. I'll be the first to admit that, but one when you talk to one. And so when their SMEs talk to me, it's clear that they're talking to a peer, and that gets everybody's temperature lowered a little bit to say, all right, this is somebody we've brought in to help this communication. The marketer's brought in an asset to help with, communicating what you told us in a way that, asking questions in the right way that would resonate with the SMEs to get why it matters to the audience out. Because oftentimes just that phrasing is difficult for a marketer to do, especially a marketing manager or lower junior team member that just wouldn't have gone through this and seen them go right and seen them go wrong. There's a way to do this to get the SMEs to engage and enroll. And if you don't do it right, that's when the wall comes up. That's when the communications break down. So it really is about, warming them up and getting them comfortable with why you're doing what you're doing. and then, asking questions in a way that makes them comfortable. But not every company does it. I mean, not everybody is forward thinking. I mean, there are some companies that adopt the old way of doing it, and it's just unfortunate, but they're not going to get where they need to get with the current way of marketing. They're still, in the 90s where we just go to trade shows and pound pavement and we just do tech sheets. I mean, this isn't the way marketing is anymore. And the customers that understand that are winning, and the customers that don't are losing. I mean, you see that in every segment, in every industry. And some people come up and come around to that realization, but often it's too late. Maybe they have a product that a competitor is developing at the same time based on a market need that they've heard from the same customer. One marketing team's doing it right based on solutions, one's doing it wrong based on features and benefits, and then it's a race, and you can guess who's going to win in that case.
Adam, I've been in the shoes of that overwhelmed marketer, and I've
Yeah.
lost many nights of sleep. It's usually on teams that are maybe one or two people doing the work with a manager that's mostly doing meetings all day. But when I get asked to create content, I have basically two choices: try to figure out on my own or reach out to someone external. Talk me through why I would choose someone like you versus going to, a content farm that
Sure.
can do a cheap content by the word.
Yeah. Content should be content done well is about the transformation. It isn't about the volume. You can pump out hundreds of articles that, again, if your laser's pointed in the wrong direction, you're just shooting a bunch of beams in the wrong place. So with fractional, what it allows you to do is it's a more efficient way to invest the budget dollars, because you can take somebody with that specific expertise and put all of the budget toward getting output from someone, maybe a $200,000 to $300,000 full-time equivalent, but you're only, leveraging a fraction of that. So you're getting all of the expertise for a fraction of the time. And if the concern is around the time, it's, well, due to the expertise, that if it's going to be a much more efficient use of those 2 to 3 hours a week or 5 hours or whatever it ends up being, but it's got to be tied to the transformation you're looking for. The content farm is motivated by number of words produced. It isn't about would a white paper resonate. It's about how can I sell you the longest form in the shortest time I can with as much margin as I can possibly get. It's a misaligned result. So, my perspective is, that overwhelmed marketer come in, the fractional person can be a thought partner, bringing ideas from similar clients in the industry, in tangential industries, to say, well, here's some things that have worked over here that may work, maybe a new way of thinking, maybe a new way to apply things. So it breaks that insular problem that a lot of companies have, where they're so focused on their own technology, they don't see any other paths because they've talked themselves into this is the way to go. Getting that different perspective is often a good challenge, and it fosters good communication internally. I've seen it help with positioning and value propositions. A lot of the value propositions that I see are, we have a mission statement, and our value prop is, well, we're the best in the industry. We have the highest expertise. I'm like, well, I've just talked to 3 other companies that have the highest expertise. So is it a tie? I don't understand how can everyone that's not a value proposition, right? What do you do better than others, and what is the right to win? Companies haven't done a good job, especially technology companies, at articulating that. And so fractional engagements with people that have done this enough times in a specific industry or segment can help flesh that out a little bit more to clarify, and it's important. Are you the leader or are you not? It's fine if you're not, but that's a different content strategy. You're not playing from ahead, you're playing from behind. So what is it about the leader that gives you an opportunity to come in and take share away? If you are the leader, how did you get there, and what things led you there that others don't do, can't do, due to expertise or capabilities? So I think that view from, a cross-functional or cross-industry approach is another huge benefit of fractional, in addition to the cost benefit and the time benefit.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's expertise that the organization doesn't have.
Right.
And that's the easiest way to get it once you accept that some people just need to get better at asking for help at the end of the day.
Well, and I think if you have this existing content bank, would you trust a content farm to review that content and repurpose it and rewrite it? Or would you trust someone that kind of can understand, all right, well, what was the point of this content? What's it written about? And how could we use it as a starting point versus starting from scratch? It would make me very nervous to hand my content library to someone that I didn't feel like knew why it was created or what it was saying, to try to repurpose it. That feels sort of like kind of the chat GPT-ification of content. You can't make it generic, because the more generic it is, the more confusing it is to the market. So it's got to be specific and targeted. And, another benefit is, all right, well, we don't have the budget for a full fractional program, but what about an audit? Or what about training our writers on how to do this differently and how to ask the questions? I mean, this is why a partnership versus a transaction, I think, is a strong case to make. And where the investment comes back, it isn't words produced, it's transformation given.
Right. Yeah. Can you take us through maybe some use cases or some examples of this, of what success looks like? Because it sounds like everybody has a quality product. Everybody's reliable. Like, we see all these words on every website. How do we, this is where, like, you have to find that, like you said, that way to differentiate. You're not going to overpromise, but you got to highlight the things that are different. And, that's the step towards differentiation. But like, when you're trying to bring this into an organization, like, I know you've had some wins. Can you take us through what the transformational process looks like, and maybe, what you've seen be successful?
Sure. So, a recent engagement that I've had as a fractional content strategist has been a company that developed a solution to doing technical design reviews. They looked at those and said, all right, well, we realized design reviews were a problem. They take a lot of time. It's clunky to do file sharing, and how do you edit those, and is it downloading a version of it and saving it and everything? And so we've created a way to solve that by using a software or cloud-based solution. Great. But why do people have that problem, and how do you solve it? And so what they were struggling with was, we don't really understand, the case to change. People are familiar with doing it one way, and yes, it's clunky, but now I have to invest in a software package. I have to train my people. I have to learn. So it's a matter of, well, why would I get someone to look at this solution versus the status quo? And the biggest competitor of most technology solutions I use is just maintaining the status quo. It's easier. I don't have bandwidth. I don't have mental energy to think about it. Why change? And I think what we did was to say, all right, well, instead of why the design review is such a problem, we focused on, well, why are the engineers so unable to get this right? And what are the problems and detriments from getting it wrong? And what does it cost you? So if they're weighing the investment in time and resource into changing, what is that? What does that look like for the status quo in terms of quantifying man hours spent, inefficiency, design changes, tooling changes? Now you're into equipment modifications and things, scrap rates, low quality. So it was a matter of figuring out use cases for it that are a more efficient way to use invested funds. And so that was the way that we won the business leaders, was to say, the do nothing solution is costing you money every day, and here's the amount quantified in terms of dollars per year. I mean, you can look at the return percentages and all the financial metrics tied to that. Like, that's easy for them to see. Once they buy in, then the content was around. So that was kind of the bottom of the funnel. What is the transformation we're looking for? Then it's a matter of, why this solution versus some other way to do this, some competitive products. And that's where a white paper and a long form piece of content comes in to really convince that technical director or manager to say, all right, well, this is the reason that this solution could work. And so, once that's developed, those long form pieces can fuel some mini campaigns of, a long form piece and a few satellite blog posts that can fuel social for weeks or months. to develop these mini campaigns to start getting the word out. And from there, the feedback and the engagement and the questions can inform the next pillar and the next round of content on, all right, well, now they're aware, how do we get their interest, or how do we get, engagement and start to, move them into the conversion phase. And so then only then can you get to the very top of funnel for what would resonate to turn their head toward this solution to the problem from an awareness standpoint. But you've started all the way at the end for why the do nothing solution doesn't work, to how our solution has solved it and what we do differently and better, to, hey, here's a new solution, to this problem. It's framed in a way that already answers those questions that you've already gone through.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the status quo. It's amazing how long some of these status quos have existed, right? When, almost everybody's complaining about the thing. And they have been for years, but they also accept it. Have you found, I've always thought, and this is where you do take those insights from other spaces where they take more risks when it comes to marketing. They understand the true consequences of not taking those risks. Positive and negative stakes, right? Even when customers or companies try to start speaking towards the problem, they often stay in the very positive lane, right? And that doesn't always do a good job of bringing down the status quo, right? So what has your experience been like? Do you also see companies kind of pushing back against to do that? Because sometimes the customer is telling you exactly that it's a major problem. Sometimes people are getting hurt in some industries because of this thing, but we can't talk about that online.
That's tricky. I mean, there's always, that goes to kind of some safety, that there's also probably some intellectual or proprietary stuff that falls into that category of we can't talk about everything we want to talk about. So again, it's a matter of, I think, focusing though on the pain points and articulating those. So, I mean, even if it's I don't know if injury rate would be an example of this or something like that, but if it's a known problem, there's a way to phrase it, I guess, in a way that doesn't get you into trouble. But that's the benefit of knowing industry terminology and words. Like, what does this look like in real life? Like, what is the real problem that's happening? And one, does our solution solve it? And two, how does it solve it? And so then how do you frame that in a way that doesn't, shed too negative a light on things, but also highlights the pain point that others are having? And if you can use customer words to do that, even better. Because if the customer's saying it either publicly or in a forum at a show or something in a way that's, that tells you it's probably okay to say, then you can go and reiterate that in their words. And the way that it's really worked well for me is if you use those direct customer words in the marketing. One, it validates that it's probably okay to say. You want to vet things by depending on how serious we're talking about. There's a legal component to this, but in general, if you want to make sure that you don't get in trouble with the customer base, use their words and frame it and have those conversations to pressure test the message. Hey, we're thinking about, a solution that we've been talking with you about. Is this a good way to frame it? Just partner with them and say, like, would this help if you saw this? Would this resonate? If you have good customer relationships, you're a supplier to them. You're solving a problem already for them with a product solution. Why not involve them in the marketing that may let them then market to their customers as well to highlight some of these value props? So enrolling them in that process, one, keeps you safe, and two, gives you some other ideas to frame things in a way that would make sense.
I would like to build on that. You mentioned your messaging getting you in trouble with the customer base. We work in industrial space. A lot of it is built on strategic partnerships.
Yeah.
How do you navigate a situation where potential messaging that you're getting from your customer base kind of is at odds, or there's a conflict of interest with your strategic partnerships? Like your customer base is telling you this is the messaging you want to hear, but it goes against some other strategic partnerships that you have either in the same business unit or in another business unit or, at a sister company.
Sure.
how would you navigate that?
I mean, you have to keep consistent with, within your company, what you're allowed to say. And so that happens a lot where, we'd love to say this, but we can't because of this reason. The best of it is just developing these strong customer relationships and just saying, hey, I hear you. Here's what I could probably say. Here's what I can't. Here's why, to the degree you're able to share, right? A lot of times there's NDAs in place and things. But could you help me reframe that in a way that steers clear of this specific piece of the message? I mean, we can't talk about that end of things. I mean, there was a project I worked on recently that a competitive material was degrading strongly due to a very common factor. And that was a conflict. We couldn't talk about that. So I said, well, how can we talk about maybe stability or, or that feature in a way that doesn't go down that path? And, just enrolling them in that conversation. It's got to be a customer that you trust and that you feel like is a good partner. A lot of times with the scale we're talking about, I mean, those relationships do exist and they are strong. But I think just strong, there's no shortcut there either. I think just enrolling them in that has got to be the way to go. And, remembering that you work for your company. So that's always got to be your allegiance. You don't want to alienate anyone, either internally or your customer base, in doing that. So the messaging's got to fit the landscape of both internal and external partners.
So did you find that path with that use case that you just mentioned? Because that's where it's, especially when it's a disruptor, and this is where I do think manufacturing and industrial can be different, because usually you get to where you are by serving the status quo to some extent. That means you have relationships with all the other people that have been serving the status quo. But if that status quo has stuff catching on fire, like, it's the quickest way to resonate is by talking about the fires,
Sure.
right? But that's where it's understanding why it's challenging, but that also, like, if we can just point ourselves towards the customer, because in reality, that's why this status quo that doesn't really make sense has been in place for 90 years. It's because, like, everybody's been dealing with this problem, and we all try to talk about, like, the good things, but it just stifles, like, innovation and disruption. And I'm not saying it's an easy challenge to fix, but, like, how do we help people, start to butt up against that line? I love your take on, try to enlist the customer in this conversation. But I'm just curious, like, when it comes to disruption and, like, because it's sad to see some products die because of this, right?
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's why risk assessments exist. That's why DFEMAs and PFEMAs exist. I mean, you do those risk assessments to be responsible. But the example that came into my head as you were talking was lithium-ion batteries, like starting fires. And so we see pictures online of cell phones and things, I don't know, for whatever reason, but that voltage is what causes that. So, I mean, as we look at fast charging solutions and we want the charging time to be parity to filling up with gasoline and all this, like, that voltage is the driver to do that. Well, lithium ion, if it can have thermal runaway and catch fire, that's real. We've been dealing with that as a society. And so then the battery manufacturing, folks would kind of look at that and go, well, that's a problem to solve. How could we increase stability as a primary function? But the secondary functions might be, what about EV range? What about longevity, or maybe it's less sensitive to ambient temperatures or things. So could something like, I mean, I have experience in this area, that's the only reason I mention it, but like a solid state battery, yes, it's 10 years off, but why is it worth pursuing? Well, it removes basically the risk of thermal runaway for those batteries, but it also delivers a higher efficiency, longer range. So, I mean, I think addressing the primary problem by supporting it with some secondary benefits to kind of, communicate those ride-alongs might be a way to clear that. I mean, it's a problem worth solving. And if we do, we get this. And maybe ideally, here's a way to quantify why that matters to a business leader in terms of either revenue or in, defect rate reductions or things like this. If it's an equipment, an equipment change or something that might help, that might decrease those rates. So I think the primary and secondary benefits are a way I've cleared those hurdles in the past.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense. And the challenges I see, in today's, and this is why we're talking about writing and, how to break through the noise. Like if you're on LinkedIn, and scrolling, the higher quality, longer lasting, stable, uh, you know, total cost of ownership, trying to explain that in an ad on LinkedIn, usually not successful. But this is where it's like we can use the customer language, except when it's this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if the stuff catches on fire, the fire in the ad is going to get somebody's attention, much faster than the, the possible benefits that we're seeing a lot of other places. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And that's where it'd just be nice to see. And I think if you want a new product to break through, this is where, like, if you're going to be a disruptor,
Mm-hmm.
be a disruptor. Like you
Right.
can't try to fit that in the old square hole. Because then, and that's what's unfortunate to see sometimes, right? And that's where it's hard because you have all the regulation and there is a significant amount of risk, I think, that doesn't exist outside of industrial manufacturing and infrastructure, right? Like a lot of the software companies and all the other spaces that can get away with this stuff, like they don't have some of this stuff to deal with. But yeah, I think that as we search for ways to break through the noise, like we gotta, it's science, right? It's behavioral. Like there's so much study to say like the negative stakes sometimes are necessary to close the deal, right? Like if we
Well,
don't,
and you mentioned regulatory. I think that's a big point. I mean, with this movement towards sustainability, that is a big disruption need. It's a pusher. It's pushing things to change. So maintaining the status quo is no longer an option anymore because you will not be compliant with regulation. So you must change. And so sometimes, in order to have a material that is more environmentally friendly, I mean, maybe it's a little bit less stable or something. So there is a trade-off that happens in terms of how to assess. All right, well, is the risk worth taking? Well, one is like, well, we have to do something. So here's an option that adds risk in this area. There might be an option that adds risk in another area. And the content, and where I love this middle of the funnel long form, is really making the case for why you should take this path instead of another path. I get the risks. Let's state it. Let's address point by point based on what customers have said about it and based on what we know, how to do that. And then address the counterpoint. You could do it this way. Here are the challenges with doing it that way. Here are the things that you may not think about that we've heard from industry specialists and experts. And at the end, it's a technical argument. It's like a court case. Like you're making the case supported by data, supported by insights, and supported with, using, topics and words that are going to resonate with people that are actively weighing those kinds of decisions in their minds. The content helps them do that. It's an asset to them, and it's a benefit to helping customers get to the right solution that they're comfortable with. And then if it's done right, there's a case study. They're so happy with what you've done, they'll go on record and say why they love what you did. So, I mean, that's really when it's done right and what success would really look like as a home run, as an ideal state outcome. Enrolling the partner along the way with those insights, communicating that value proposition and how to solve it, and then tying it up with a case study to tell other industry participants about it is really impactful.
Yeah. And that's why, like, at the end of the day, engineers, scientists, that's the value of marketing. And because we know that, they've all been saying this stuff inside the one-on-one, like live discussions to close sales, right?
Sure.
And we're not saying we're just going to start crying fire everywhere, but we can help you figure out ways to say it in a way that's going to get the point across in the least risky way. So we have to at least try. And, you come to the marketing team, the marketer to innovate on that piece, right? It's not to create, something without foundation that's just fluffy and trying to get, attention. It's we know this is a problem. Like we can, if we get you in the room, we win every time. But how do we get more people in the room? How do we get that conversation outside of the room, keep it under control, all that stuff? Like that's what we love helping with, right? Like that's
Right.
like
And
the
I think
code
that's
that,
the importance of credibility of the marketing team and why I love doing what I do. I mean, people bring me in and it's easy for me to establish that credibility because of my experiences. Like I've sat where you're sitting, I've done these things, and here's the reason my perspective is what it is. I sort of verbalize what my content piece would look like for my way to support. But if the marketing, team hasn't established that credibility on the front end, that's the hardest thing, and why I think fractional is a great, is a great option, because it already kind of comes in with that inherent credibility versus, our internal team can't know about everything. So they by default have no credibility. That's probably not the right way to do it either, but you can pull in fractional support in specific areas that you want to bolt onto the team, and then give your team the peace of mind to know that, hey, we've got this specialist that's adding this kind of expertise to what we're talking about. That credibility is there. Let's partner together to work on how we communicate these points to the audience.
It feels like a perfect combination between being a technical expert and then being a marketer. Both me and Chris, a lot of our credibility comes from us being both engineers and like scientists coming into marketing. But I feel like this is not something you plan ahead. So I'm really interested, from one engineer turned marketer to another. I'm interested in your story and how, after 20 years of being an engineer, the marketing path came to be.
Yeah, I started with, so I was in R&D, as I mentioned. So a lot of my job was, hey, here's a competitive patent. Can you beat this, or can you get around it or through it in some way? And so I would develop products to try to, all right, well, what are the claims? Where's the white space? Finding that, articulating it, communicating what the product should look like, and then go on developing a prototype, and then, getting a commercial product launched. There was a lot of internal sales that had to happen, and a lot of communication of some pretty, as you get into patent claims, you're into the nitty gritty. Chemical formulations. Here's the range of carbon chains that's covered. But if we tailor the patent this way, we can, so it was all about figuring out those angles and those places where you can live that no one else lives. And so I developed that kind of through the patent end of things. And then, as I would have to sell the ideas higher and higher up the organization, I started making, kind of pitch decks, for lack of a better word, for internal stakeholders. Here's the solution. Here's why I think it works. Here's a ton of data that we've done in analyses. Here's an analysis and a model that matches data to make sure that the performance, is qualified. And here's why we need the money to build a piece of equipment. So making those cases kind of helped me hone. Like I knew the way they would need to hear it that would resonate, to say, oh, I got it. That's why we need to spend this fiscal year, or we need to find it and not do something else and prioritize it. And so then I would get the feedback, hey, that was really good. Like, we need to do more of that. Hey, can you actually help this group over here, or this, group over here? And then I started to go, well, that's one company. Wonder if there are other companies that may benefit from this too. And I found that the quality of content that when I started to look at it, was either super high level because there wasn't the technical depth, or it was a journal paper on the other end of things written by an SME that was was written like a thesis or a dissertation or something, with so many 5-syllable words that nobody could even get through it. I saw this big gap and opportunity in the middle of those two, to say, all right, well, what would thought leadership look like that's technical enough to gain the credibility, but inclusive enough to bring in people that haven't lived and breathed this for the last 5 years. And so once you start looking at content in that way, from that combined business or commercial and technical audience, that's sort of how it became clear to me and where I thought I could help.
Thank you for making that jump. We need as many people as we can get. And there's so much there's so much potential in the manufacturing space to do great things. And that's why we're starting this, right? Like, it's really just education, training, because we see all these other spaces doing it. That's the beauty of digital marketing and content, is it's very tried and true from the other perspective, in that it's not rocket science. Once you get the right people in the room with the right objectives and the right goals, customer focused, the stuff puts itself together. And that's the fun part of this, is that we're working with very smart people.
Right.
And the challenge is just getting to the aha moment.
Right.
Once the aha moment happens,
right,
they understand it very quickly. And now they are 150% committed to the cause. Right.
Well, and as the technical marketer, I always looked at, like, look, I own that moment. I own making sure that moment happens. And when it does, everybody in the room is in. They're all in at that point, right? So that, and creating those moments establishes even more credibility, but then that makes them want to do it more and again, and they start to buy in. And then they start to, hey, could we do one about this? And then there's some more ideas, and they're starting to think like that. But, well, here's something else we did. Can you think of a way that sort of like we did over here that may help in this area, versus, okay, I don't have time for marketing. Like, we're, the adults are talking, developing products over here, like whatever, like that starts to break down once they feel what it feels like to get that right from people in the room that they had maybe struggled communicating with in the past. I mean, I've been sort of the facilitator of some of that internal communication versus them arguing in comments of a Word document. I like to do that live versus that way. So.
For sure.
Yeah.
Adam, this has been amazing, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours, especially with all of us three being technical people turned to marketers. This was a very fun conversation. Where can people find you?
So the easiest way is on LinkedIn, Adam.s or Adam-S-Kimmel. That's my handle. And my website is askconsultingsolutions.com. So I'm there. My digital portfolio is there. I do fractional support. DMs are open. I love questions. I mean, talking about this topic I don't think we can do it enough, right? So I'm always happy to engage, with anyone who's interested.
Well, thank you again for being our guest, Adam. And for everybody listening, we look forward to having you in the next one.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Adam.